They say dogs can't keep secrets. But what if I told you I know something that could destroy a man's reputation forever? I am Luna, and I was the only witness to the night she was cast out with nothing, carrying just one suitcase from a mansion worth millions. But here's what nobody knows. I followed her into the cold, into that broken-down attic. And what I discovered there in a forgotten trash bag, it changed everything. You see, humans think they're so clever, hiding their sins behind lawyers and legal papers. But they forget, dogs remember scents. Dogs find things. And sometimes, dogs become the key to justice. The woman they called worthless is about to prove them all wrong. And I was there for every single moment of her revenge. I am Luna, a 6-year-old Siberian husky with ice blue eyes and a coat white as fresh snow. I belong to a family that lived in a grand house with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The kind of place where every footstep echoed like a reminder of wealth and status. The family had a son, Michael, technically my owner, but he was always busy with college and his own life. The person I truly bonded with was Lisa, Michael's mother, a woman in her early 40s with kind hazel eyes and gentle hands that would scratch behind my ears every morning as she sipped her coffee. Lisa had been married to Robert for 15 years. From my corner by the fireplace, I watched their marriage like a slow-burning candle, beautiful at first, but gradually consuming itself. Robert was a successful businessman, always in expensive suits, always on important phone calls. The house reflected his success. Imported furniture, original paintings, a 3-car garage, and a backyard where I could run freely among perfectly manicured gardens. But I noticed things humans often miss. I smelled the tension before it became visible. I heard the sharp whispers behind closed doors. I saw how Lisa's shoulders would tense when Robert's car pulled into the driveway. She would quickly straighten cushions, check her appearance in mirrors, and put on that bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. For 3 years, I observed their daily dance. Robert controlled the money, the social calendar, even what Lisa wore to dinner parties. She had given up her career as a teacher when they married, dedicating herself to creating the perfect home. She volunteered at local charities, maintained friendships with other wives in their social circle, and poured her energy into being the ideal wife and stepmother to Michael. I saw her crying quietly in the garden sometimes, when she thought no one was watching. She would kneel by her rose bushes, the only space in the house that was truly hers, and let silent tears water the soil. I would sit beside her, pressing my warm fur against her leg, and she would whisper, "Oh, Luna, what would I do without you?" Our routine was peaceful before everything changed. Every morning at 6, Lisa would wake and let me out into the backyard. We'd share quiet moments on the patio as the sun rose, her hands running through my thick coat while she planned her day. She'd tell me about her dreams of traveling, of maybe returning to teaching someday, of having her own little garden somewhere. I didn't know then that these were the last peaceful mornings we would share in that house. But looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way she held me a little tighter each morning, as if she already knew a storm was coming. Then one Tuesday evening in November, everything began to unravel. It started with raised voices from Robert's study. I was lying by the fireplace when I heard Lisa's trembling voice. "I just asked why there were charges to jewelry stores I've never been to." Robert's response was like thunder, loud, intimidating, designed to end the conversation. Over the following weeks, I noticed the changes. Lisa stopped humming while she cooked. She jumped at sudden sounds. The house felt colder, despite the heating system running constantly. Robert's business trips became more frequent, but when he was home, the atmosphere grew suffocating. I watched Lisa discover things: credit card statements hidden in Robert's desk, phone calls answered in hushed tones, nights when he came home smelling of unfamiliar perfume. Each discovery seemed to chip away at her spirit. She began moving through the house like a ghost of herself. The breaking point came on a Friday night in December. I was sleeping in the living room when shouting erupted from upstairs. Not just arguing, screaming. I heard something crash, possibly glass breaking. My protective instincts kicked in, and I bounded up the stairs. Through the partially open bedroom door, I saw Robert towering over Lisa, who was backing away with fear in her eyes. "You've been snooping through my things," he roared. "After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me." Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. "I just want to understand what's happening to our marriage." "Our marriage?" Robert laughed bitterly. "You think you have any claim to this life? To this house? You brought nothing to this relationship. Everything here is mine." I saw Lisa's face crumble. 15 years of marriage, of sacrifice, of building a life together, reduced to nothing in one cruel sentence. The next morning brought lawyers. I watched from my usual spot as stern-faced men in dark suits filled the living room. Lisa sat at the far end of the sofa, looking small and lost while papers were spread across the coffee table. I caught fragments of conversation: prenuptial agreement, no claim to assets, reasonable settlement. What I understood was this: Lisa was being erased from the life she had helped build. The process was swift and brutal. Within 2 weeks, moving trucks arrived. But they weren't packing Lisa's belongings. They were removing traces of her existence. Her photos came down from walls. Her books disappeared from shelves. Her favorite armchair, the one where she'd read to me on quiet afternoons, was loaded onto a truck bound for a donation center. Lisa was allowed to take 1 suitcase of clothing and personal items. I watched her hands shake as she folded her few remaining dresses, tucked away the small jewelry box her mother had given her, and carefully wrapped a framed photo of us together in the garden. On her last night in the house, she knelt beside me in the living room. Tears streamed down her face as she buried her fingers in my fur. "I'm so sorry, Luna. I wish I could take you with me, but..." Her voice broke. "I don't even know where I'm going." Michael was away at college and had been told his father was handling the divorce. He didn't know the full extent of what was happening, and Robert made sure it stayed that way. The next morning, Robert's voice was cold and final. "The car service is waiting. Take your bag and go." I watched from the window as Lisa walked down the front steps of the house that had been her home for 15 years, carrying everything she owned in a single suitcase. She didn't look back, but I couldn't let her go alone. And what happened next? Well, it's why humans should never underestimate the power of a dog's loyalty. As the car service pulled away with Lisa inside, I made a choice that would change both our lives forever. I am a husky, bred for endurance, for loyalty, for never giving up. While Robert was busy celebrating his legal victory with phone calls to his lawyer, I slipped through the backyard gate that Lisa had always left slightly loose when she worked in her garden. Following Lisa's scent through the city streets was like navigating by starlight. I ran for hours, my paws hitting pavement I'd never felt before, past buildings and traffic and crowds of people who looked at me with confusion. A lost dog, they probably thought. They had no idea I was exactly where I needed to be. I found Lisa in a part of town I'd never seen. Narrow streets with old brick buildings, fire escapes zigzagging up their sides like metal spines. She was standing in front of a weathered door, holding a key with shaking hands. When she turned and saw me, her face went through a dozen emotions at once. "Luna?" Her voice was incredulous. "How did you? What are you doing here?" I walked up to her and sat at her feet, looking up into those hazel eyes that had shown me kindness for 3 years. My message was clear. "Wherever you go, I go." She knelt down and wrapped her arms around my neck, sobbing into my fur. "Oh, sweet girl, you followed me. You actually followed me." The apartment, if you could call it that, was a single room on the 4th floor of a building that creaked with every step. There was a narrow bed, a small table, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out onto an alley where trash cans lined up like metal soldiers. The bathroom was down the hall, shared with other tenants. The heating was inconsistent, leaving us both shivering on cold nights. But we were together. The first weeks were the hardest I've ever witnessed a human endure. Lisa had a small savings account Robert hadn't known about. Money she'd hidden away from her volunteer work stipends and birthday gifts over the years. It wasn't much, maybe enough for 2 months of rent and basic food. She spent hours every day on a borrowed laptop, applying for jobs. Teaching positions were scarce mid-school year, and her 15-year gap in employment made things harder. I watched her face change with each rejection email, each unreturned phone call. Some days, she wouldn't get out of bed until afternoon. She'd lie there staring at the ceiling while I pressed my warm body against her side, willing my presence to be enough to pull her back to the world. On her darkest days, she'd hold me tight and whisper, "I don't know how to do this, Luna. I don't know how to be alone." But she wasn't alone. I made sure of that. When she forgot to eat, I would bring her my food bowl, a habit that made her laugh despite her tears. When she cried, I would rest my head on her lap and let her fingers find comfort in my fur. When the apartment felt too small and suffocating, I would go to the door and whine until she agreed to walk with me around the neighborhood. Those walks became our salvation. We discovered a small park 6 blocks away where I could run off leash in the early mornings when no one else was around. Lisa would sit on a bench and watch me play, and for brief moments, I'd see glimpses of the woman she used to be. The one who laughed at my silly antics and clapped when I performed tricks. Winter deepened, and our tiny apartment grew colder. Lisa couldn't afford to keep the heat on during the day, so we huddled together under every blanket she owned. She started taking on cleaning jobs, office buildings that needed scrubbing after hours, houses in neighborhoods where she once lived as an equal. I watched her hands grow rough and red from cleaning chemicals. I saw her wince when she thought I wasn't looking, her body aching from the physical labor she wasn't used to. But she never complained. Not once. Late at night, when the building was quiet except for the sounds of other people's lives bleeding through thin walls, Lisa would tell me about her fears. What if I can't rebuild? What if this is all there is now? What if I'm too old to start over? I couldn't answer with words, but I answered with presence. Every morning, I was there when she woke up. Every night, I was the last thing she saw before falling asleep. In a world that had stripped away her identity, her security, her sense of worth, I remained constant. One particularly difficult evening in February, after another job rejection and a notice that rent was increasing, Lisa broke down completely. She sat on our small bed and sobbed deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to pull from the very core of her being. "I had a life, Luna," she cried. "I had a home and friends and purpose. I was somebody. Now look at me, 43 years old, living in a room smaller than my old walk-in closet, cleaning toilets for minimum wage. How did I let this happen?" That night was the turning point. Not because anything magical happened, but because Lisa finally let herself grieve the life she'd lost. And in that grief, something began to shift. Little did we know, fate was about to deliver us the most unexpected gift, hidden in plain sight in a pile of forgotten trash. It was on one of our morning walks in March that everything changed. I have a habit, some might call it a flaw, of investigating interesting scents. That morning, something in the park's trash area caught my attention. While Lisa sat on our usual bench, I wandered over to investigate. Hidden beneath some old newspapers was a faded cloth bag, the kind women used to carry their personal items decades ago. Something about it smelled familiar, like Lisa's old perfume, mixed with something else I couldn't quite place. I brought it to Lisa, dropping it at her feet with the pride of a retriever presenting a prize duck. "What did you find, girl?" She opened the bag with curious fingers, then gasped. Inside was a small notebook, its pages yellowed but still intact. The handwriting was Lisa's, but from years ago. It was a record book she'd kept of household expenses, including detailed notes about Robert's business investments, property purchases, and financial decisions she'd helped research and advise on during their marriage. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered, flipping through pages. "I completely forgot about this. I used to help Robert with investment research before he decided I wasn't smart enough to understand business." The notebook contained evidence of Lisa's intellectual contributions to Robert's financial success. Contributions that had been systematically erased from their divorce proceedings. More importantly, it contained records of assets that had been hidden during the divorce, money that legally belonged to both of them. Within a month, Lisa had contacted a new lawyer. The case was straightforward once the evidence was presented. Robert had committed fraud during their divorce proceedings, hiding assets and undervaluing others. The settlement was substantial. Not just money, but vindication. Lisa could have moved back to a house in the suburbs, could have reclaimed a life similar to what she'd lost. Instead, she made a choice that taught me the true meaning of transformation. Lisa used her settlement to purchase and renovate the entire building where we'd been living, not as a return to luxury, but as something entirely new. She created a safe house for women escaping domestic violence, a place where they could stay while rebuilding their lives. Our tiny fourth-floor room became the heart of something beautiful. Women arrived broken and afraid, carrying suitcases that held everything they owned, just as Lisa once had. But they didn't leave the same way they came. I became the unofficial greeter, offering comfort to children who had seen too much, providing silent companionship to women who had forgotten what unconditional love felt like. Lisa established counseling programs, job training, childcare, all the support she'd wished for during her darkest days. The building transformed from a place of last resort into a launching pad for new lives. Women who arrived defeated left empowered. Children who came scared found laughter again. Lisa never married again, but she found something better. Purpose that couldn't be taken away by someone else's cruelty. She discovered that her worth wasn't tied to someone else's validation. Today, 5 years later, hundreds of women have passed through our doors. They call it Luna's house, because they say I was the first to show them what loyalty without conditions looks like. Humans often think strength means never falling down. But I've learned that true strength is getting back up, then turning around to help others do the same. Lisa still lives in that same fourth-floor room, though she could afford any house in the city now. When people ask why, she smiles and says, "Because this is where I learned who I really am." Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, and sometimes it works through the nose of a curious dog. If this story showed you that loyalty can change everything, share it with someone who needs to remember their own worth. And if you've ever had a four-legged friend show you unconditional love when the world turned its back on you, tell us about them in the comments. Because in a world full of people who break their promises, there's something beautiful about a heart that never gives up on you. Subscribe here and never miss another story that inspires.